why are you here? What are the questions that you have about graduate school? What sort of plans do you have, hopes? So think about that for 30 seconds to a minute here. Pull those ideas into your focus. Okay, and then turn to a neighbor of yours, make sure nobody gets excluded, it could be 2 neighbors or something like that, and share what you're thinking about. Like, what are you interested in learning about grad school? What are your hopes or plans for grad school? So let's talk to our neighbors for a couple of minutes. Consolidate ideas. So I'm going to next ask each of our panelists just to briefly introduce themselves so you know who are the people who are answering questions. And then we can just open the floor to questions and answers. So,
sure. My name is Patrick Barnes. I'm a graduate student in the biology department. I also just got hired over across campus, so I kind of live in 2 worlds right now.
What did you get hired to do?
Take care of the experimental animals. Cool. So relevant-ish to my degree, which is a pleasant surprise.
My name is Dan Pollard. I'm an assistant professor here in the biology department, and I'm on the graduate committee, which is how I ended up organizing this workshop. This is the second workshop that we've done focused on trying to provide information in any way possible to all of you about extending your undergraduate career into graduate studies. And so if this forum doesn't address all your needs, I'm the person to talk to you about it and let me know how else we might be able to help you out in your quest for graduate studies. But welcome. Thank you for being here.
My name is Nick Galati. I'm an assistant professor here in the biology department. I would say, as we're discussing things, one thing that I have expertise in or experience in is kind of navigating the application to graduate school when you have a lapse between the end of undergrad and the start of graduate school. So if any of you know that you might not be applying now, but you might want to apply in a couple of years after you graduate, I've got some insights into that side of the application process.
Hi, I'm John McDonald. I recently retired from the University of Delaware and moved here to Bellingham. And when I was at Delaware, I was chair of the Graduate Admissions Committee for about 20 years. So I've seen close to 3,000, seen and evaluated and saw what other people thought of about 3,000 grad applications. So if you have questions about what makes for a good or bad grad application, I have some ideas.
My name is Benjamin. I'm a first-year grad student here at Western. So my research is mainly focused actually in Dan's lab over there on evolutionary genetics and specifically how natural variation affects protein expression dynamics. So I just went through the application process and all the interview processes. So if you have specific questions on how to find grad schools, how to search for ones that meet your interests, how to go through the application process, get letters of rec, I'm your guy, as well as many of the other people.
My name is Adrienne Wang. I'm an assistant professor here in the biology department. I definitely come from a more molecular background, and I guess similar to Nick, I also had a large gap between undergraduate and graduate school. I also had an unsuccessful graduate school application experience, so I can address major changes that I made between the unsuccessful application and the successful one. And I don't know, I feel like I've explored almost every non-traditional science career that there is, so.
I'm Allie Lombardo. I'm a first-year grad student. I'm working in Brady Olson's lab doing ocean chemical ecology, looking at how ocean acidification affects dopamine that's produced by green algae. I'm from Ohio, so if you guys are looking at grad schools in other states, I can tell you how to do that and how to come acquainted with the moving process, especially if it's your first time.
My name is Anastasia. I'm a second-year graduate student, so if you have any questions about what life is like as a grad student, I can certainly answer those. Things related to TAing or just what researching is like, things like this. Also, I really like grad school and I would like to keep going, so I'm applying to PhD programs for next year, next academic year. So if you have questions about that whole process, I could help because I'm going through it right now.
I'm Dave Hooper. I'm a professor, full professor in the bio department. And I'm also happen to be this year starting to be as a chair of the graduate committee here in the department. So that deals with looking at graduate applications and evaluating them and helping to find good matches with the professors. I also had kind of a untraditional pathway from undergraduate to graduate school. I was a chemistry major as an undergrad. Really liked chemistry, but decided that's not what I wanted to go to grad school, and decided I wanted to do ecology for grad school. Had a pretty big gap. I was out for about 5 years before I went back to grad school, and did some fun stuff in the meantime. But then negotiating that transition was an interesting process again. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that next time.
My name is Alejandro Acevedo. I'm a professor here in biology and also in the SMATE program, the Science, Math, and Technology Education program. And I'm originally from Mexico, so a lot of my experience has been, in terms of grad school, has been applying from a Mexican background into going into a different country, into grad school. What it's like to arrive with 2 suitcases and a backpack in another country to start your graduate degree. And here at Western, I have been advising many grad students. I've seen many applications of grad students who want to do it. But now I think I have an idea about what I'd like to see in applications and what I think would make successful grad students with me.
I'm Lena Dahlberg. I'm an associate professor here in biology. I took a year between undergraduate and graduate school doing a Fulbright fellowship or scholarship. So if you have questions about how that works and the merits of taking a year to process your undergraduate experience before starting grad school, I can talk about that. And I think, as Alejandro said, I'm starting to understand what I am looking for in grad students. So happy to help with that. I also, at some point, can talk about some other resources that are happening on campus.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, that there are some other events upcoming in actually the next couple of weeks that are pertinent to applying to grad school. So if anyone is more aware of what those are than I am, please jump in and share.
I'm going to jump in and share then
Please.
before I forget otherwise. There is a life sciences, sort of molecular biology and biochemistry life sciences symposium next Friday. And it is set up to be a scientific symposium with speakers coming up from UW. Many of them are graduate students, and other graduate students who aren't talking are also going to be there. So if you're interested in grad school at UW, those are PhD students in molecular and biochemistry sort of fields. They'll be up here, but part of that day is going to have a working lunch for graduate school applications. Anastasia. So if you're interested in getting sort of feedback on what your materials look like, that's a great time, or finding out what a CD is even. That's a good place to go. There's also going to be a lot of networking there, so the head of the current molecular cell biology program is coming up, and you can talk to him about what his program looks like. There's also going to be an industry representative there, so if you're interested in science industry, that's a good one. Also tomorrow, I know it's short notice, tomorrow at noon to 2, there's a Learn and Lunch over at BNS. If you're interested in talking to somebody who's in neuroscience at UW. So if you're interested in that for a PhD program, it's another place to go. I've been my only option.
The one that's next Friday, where is it at?
It's over there. It's being hosted in chemistry, and why don't I know anything about it? I don't know, but we'll put that on the Facebook page. Sorry, I don't have that on the top of my head.
Okay, open the floor to all your questions, as small as where do I get started to as big as why would I go to grad school.
Don't be afraid to ask hard questions.
So I'm aiming at trying to graduate, it's springtime, but if you end up in a different quarter for your graduation, does grad school only start like fall, or does it matter so much what quarter or semester that you're starting grad school?
At least the PhD programs I've looked at, so UW, or this is in genomic sciences, so maybe it varies for department, but a lot of times they only accept applications for fall at the beginning of the academic year.
I think that does vary from school to school. Though. Some schools have rolling application, and some have hard deadline.
At Delaware, we took almost all of our applicants started in the fall, but we generally took in 3 or 4 to start the spring semester. And I started my PhD program in beginning of spring. It's kind of weird because you're not really part of either cohort, and you're kind of off schedule for what classes you're taking. So you might want to either work for a while or see the world for a while, depending on when you're going, and then start in the fall, just for that reason. But there are places that take people.
If you get your ducks in a row, and even if you're going to be graduating off schedule, you can often apply to a school and then defer your application or defer your acceptance. So you've been accepted and you say, that's great. I'd really like to start in a year while I finish things up.
Okay, great.
It also sometimes happens that, generally you apply to work with a professor, and if that person has funding for a particular project, it may be possible to just start your research even though you don't actually matriculate into grad school and start taking classes. And I agree that the cohort experience is really a good one to have. But you could start and then matriculate into the actual program after a quarter or two of maybe working in the lab.
And that's great, because rather than jumping in and having to start research, start being a TA, and start a bunch of new classes, and start living in a new place all at once, you get a head start on the living and doing research part. So if you can swing that, that's great.
It's actually what I started out doing this past summer. I was actually volunteering for a couple days a week, starting research out in the been a dream to come here in the fall and taking classes and TA, but have a solid idea of what my research project is going to look like going forward. So if you can swing that, great. If not, no pressure.
I just want to add one more thing. Don't be afraid to game the system. If you apply for a PhD program, you can back out with a master's partial way through. One of the reasons you might do that is because master's students generally have much less funding, much less access to high quality research than PhD students. And if you
Except at Western, where
exactly. So we only have master's program here. So it really depends. But the system games grad students, so don't be afraid to game the system. I'll just say that.
Who needs grad school? Let's just take 12 steps back.
That varies a lot across fields, so, and even across fields, there's all kinds of career paths that you depend or don't depend on grad school. So there's no one answer to that. Anyone who wants to be a professor at college would need to have a PhD. There are a lot of industry positions for people who are interested in industry that are available with just undergraduate degrees or with master's degrees, but some of them are only for people who have PhDs. And jumping in at that level gives you a much higher ceiling compared to if you're starting in industry with just an undergraduate degree.
Yeah, going off that, it depends on what exactly you want to do. So my undergrad's in toxicology, so I could have done like lab work toxicology and be like the head toxicologist. Now that's not what I wanted to do. For something like that, I'd need a PhD, but I want to do like more field work, do like aquatic toxicology. And for some of that stuff, I can still do it with my bachelor's, but I might make more money or have a better opportunity of getting the job if I get my master's. So it just kind of depends. Anything in academia, typically you'll need your PhD, but I even had professors on my undergrad for other masters, so you can still teach in some areas, not just your master's as well.
And it'd be worth pointing out, like, so what are the skills that you're developing in grad school as opposed to like what career paths require it? Because that's just another way of thinking about it. And so in grad school, with some exceptions, you're largely focused on becoming an independent scientist, so someone who can run a research project and see it all the way through to publication. And you are also developing your skills as an instructor. So you spend time as a graduate TA, usually running graduate TA classrooms. So you're developing both of those skills.
I've had, my master's students have gone on to a whole variety of different jobs. I've had some go on to PhDs, but I've also had them go into, for example, environmental consulting, go into teaching. So several people said, I just want to learn how to do independent research before I go teach high school students how to do research. I've had them go on to work for government agencies and nonprofit organizations. So a number, there's a lot of NGOs in conservation have PhDs or have scientists working for them. There's a lot of idealistic PhDs out there, idealistic scientists. So to compete for them, those positions, it's usually you need some kind of master's or PhD.
But you don't need to go to grad school if you like doing science, if you like the hands-on part of it. If you want, if you need to go to grad school if you want to be an independent scientist and come up with your own ideas of what to do. But if you want, a 9-to-5 job where you go in and you cut open a bunch of Drosophila brains or something, or go out in the field and count some endangered species to go working for an environmental consulting company or something like that. And then at 5 o'clock you go home and pet the cats and sew cosplay costumes or whatever else you like to do. That's the kind of job you can get with an undergraduate degree. And so if you're not sure, you get that kind of job. You work for a year or two, and you either decide, hey, I like doing the hands-on part, and my boss down the hall is, PhD, is tearing their hair out, writing grant proposals, coming up with lectures, sitting on panels, all this other kind of stuff, while you're in the lab doing all the fun stuff. So, if you're not sure you want the kind of career that requires grad school, work at the other kind of career for a while, see what you like.
Can I just add one brief thing? I think that it's worthwhile to pay attention to the economic climate. If you know you're going to be graduating and there are a lot of jobs, it might be prudent to get a job first and pay off your student loans from undergrad first. And I will say that because there are so many more graduate degrees and so many more undergraduate degrees, it can be substantially harder than it used to be to land those sorts of jobs with undergrad degrees. I have a master's degree, and that's the sort of job that I was able to get with a master's degree. And so I was unflexible with other things in my life, right? And so it depends on what you're willing to be flexible with. But the economy is a big factor.
Dylan?
So for applications, what are you really looking for, and what are kind of like red flags? If anyone knows.
I'm not going to address the specifics, but I think I want to point out something that Dave Hooper mentioned that I think is important to keep in mind. In a way, there are two applications, and I'm talking to Western and in general to grad school. One, you apply to the university, right? And they ask you for a series of requirements in written and scores and certain things like one, essays, best university. But as Dave Hooper mentioned, you work with a professor. So you need to have a professor willing to take you as a student. And that's a slightly, or even a very different process depending on the professor. So again, I know I'm not addressing specifically the question. Right now, I just want everyone to know that you want to find out with whom you want to work. And the sooner you do it, the better. Here at Western, people apply, and we, all the faculty, get the applications and say, so-and-so says that wants to work with you. Would you be interested in the student? The way I do it, and I know other folks do it similar, I like to know who that person is before I consider that. And so I put on my website, I'm interested in students, and I want to see their application. This is what I'm looking for. This is not for university, this is for me, for my lab, for Alejandro. And get to know them, and I talk to them in December, and we do Skype interviews, and then by January, when they apply here, I already know who I'm taking. So keep that in mind, that's not uncommon. If you go to other universities, you'll see that many faculty have a list of what they want in grad students and to work with them. So again, keep that in mind. There are kind of two parallel processes happening.
Okay. That varies whether you should contact an individual professor or not. That varies from field to field. I think it's very common in ecology and evolution, and it varies from school to school. At Delaware, our faculty were almost exclusively, molecular biology, cell biology, that sort of thing. And most of our applicants did not contact an individual professor. They would apply and they'd say, I want to make the world a better place by curing diseases, and I'm interested in development and microbiology or something vague like that. And we'd look at them and say, okay, yeah, this person could work with half a dozen people, and then they would come, and then they would pick someone. But it's different at different schools and in different fields. So that's something, if you're interested in a particular school, even if you don't know what you want to do, you should at least have an idea, okay, I can see myself working with these people.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on that. In my experience, again, coming from like a molecular background and large universities, I did my PhD at Michigan, and it was a similar thing. I definitely, for all my applications, reached out to some subset of professors and identified people whose research I thought was interesting. I don't know that it hurt. I definitely did not hear back from a majority of them. And I know at Michigan, with the whole cohort experience, they only take people in the fall. And then you have to do a rotation between at least 3 different labs. So I know a lot of people who came in thinking that they were going to work with Dr. So-and-so, and ultimately found that they were not a good fit, or that they just got some, they piqued their interest in other labs and ended up not doing it. So, so I would just say, I don't think it hurts, and I've heard that sometimes even in large universities like that, if there actually is a professor who's like, yes, I want this student, they can go to bat for you and get you in through the university system. But I think that's not super common.
Can I add one thing too? Like your question is, what's a red flag and what looks good? And so I would say that one thing that would be a red flag for me is that if you say, and also I think we should take a step back, and there's different kinds of grad school, right? There can be a professional school, like you're going to be a genetic counselor. That's not a research degree, you're being trained in a skill, right? And so that's like one, there's then like a research master's degree, which is like a pre-PhD, and then there's like a PhD program. And there's other varieties, but grad school is definitely not one thing. And so this advice is for a research-based degree. If you say that you want to do research, but you don't have a portfolio that shows that you understand the commitments and the requirements of doing research, in my experience, that's been a red flag. So people that are gung-ho, like, and it doesn't, you can still get in eventually, but you really need to show that you're invested in research, specifically for a PhD program. If you're going to go apply for a PhD program and spend 5 to 7 years doing research, you need to make it clear that you understand the frustration and the excitement and the joy and all of that side of it. So just making sure those pieces mesh.
And can I just piggyback on that one last thing? Because that is what I'd say was the big thing for me. When I got my undergrad, I worked in a research lab, had a terrible experience, and was like, screw this, I'm gonna go into industry. I got a job in industry, and I was kind of like, I really missed the like intellectual stimulation, and that was my failed graduate application, was while I was working for, it was still a biotech, but I was working for them, and I applied, and I heard it was like crickets. And so I took advice like that, and I went and I left a pretty good paying job in the area to go back into the lab. And then I applied again from that position, and it was night and day, the response that I got from graduate schools. And I would say that was a big part of it, was proving, like putting my money where my mouth was, right?
I think one thing to point out is that having research experience doesn't 100% mean I've been in someone's lab, but this idea of being able to speak to the knowledge of what research involves could be a different, you could take a course that has a research component, and if you can speak to what that research elicited out of you, like why was it exciting, why was it hard, what was a challenge you ran into and overcame, that's way different than saying like, since I was 5 years old, I've always loved science. Like, okay, but that doesn't tell me that you're gonna succeed as a graduate student. But if you can say, I ran into this hurdle and it was hard, and this is how I had to think in different ways, even that if that's within a course-based research opportunity, like I think that is something to kick to.
Yeah, research experience, if you don't have it, and it doesn't, it can be volunteering in someone's lab, it could be you're working after graduation, it could be summer internships, a summer at Friday Harbor or the Hutch or something. It could be volunteering for the Nature Conservancy, but there has to be something there. I remember we had an applicant who had a 4.0 GPA from a pretty good school, and we never got 4.0 GPAs. They applied somewhere else, they didn't go there. He had a 4.0 GPA. And he said, yeah, I got this 4.0 GPA, and I was on the soccer team, and that kept me too busy, and so I was never able to get research experience, but I really love science. And we reject it, because it's motivation. If you've got the motivation, if you're really interested enough, because grad school is kind of hard, and you have to be motivated.
I'm a little worried that like we're gonna not get enough questions. So I'd just like to take another question, but feel free to answer previous questions. Did you have a question?
I wanted to ask about experience versus talking about how you want the experience, but it was pretty answered.
Okay, great. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up on all of this by just saying that having that research experience isn't just important for your application, it's important for your health and well-being and happiness. Because if you haven't done that and you go off into grad school, especially there's different programs, like some require you to go in and do a master's first and then you sort of move up and move into a PhD. Others will only, like Western only has a master's program. Some other universities, like where I went to, is only a PhD program. If you're going into a PhD program, you want to know that you like doing research if it's a research-based project. And you want to have a pretty good idea of what you want to do that in. It may not be as specific as I want to work in so-and-so's lab.
Right.
Because I did my graduate work at Stanford, and there the cell molecular people was very much like you guys. They came in, they applied to the program, they did rotations, and then they figured out who they wanted to work with. For the ecologists, it was more like, okay, I want to work in that person's lab. And so having a good idea of what you're interested in when you go in there is, I think, invaluable. And so for me, having time, especially shifting gears between being a chemistry undergrad and going into grad school in ecology, having time to sort of figure out, okay, what exactly in ecology is it that I'm interested in, that was invaluable time.
Can I do a little poll just real quick? So how many people have already had some kind of research experience, whether that's in a class you feel like you could write about, or you're in someone's lab, or you did a summer internship? Okay, and then how many people would like to have that kind of experience, but you're not really sure how to get going on that? People like that? Okay, so maybe we can try and if any of you have specific questions about how that, but let's try and help these people. That's an important thing to address.
I'll speak a little bit to that. When I was doing my undergrad at Dub, I was very confused on how to get experience, get research experience, especially in the professional sense. Most jobs will say we want 1 or 2 years of experience at a lab. How do you get that? So what I did specifically is I reached out and voluntarily talked to specific faculty members whose research I found interesting. I just shot them an email and said, hey, do you have some opportunities for shadowing or for interning in the lab? And that got me started with a couple of different professors, which I then met with and interviewed, and then was able to get in as an undergraduate researcher for about a year and a half. So that helped with my application. And speaking more towards the grad school application process and specific variety in your application, if you don't have research experience, whether it be professional or volunteering in a lab, that's okay as long as you have demonstrated knowledge and commitment to having that kind of experience in the future, and you understand the scientific process, all different aspects of it. And you can draw upon experience that you have in other fields in your application to say, I managed this educational program for a year or so, and that gave me experience with project management. How will that translate, do you think, to doing research at the graduate school level? That can be an additional resource to set you apart from the rest of the pack. But as far as getting research experience, the onus is most of the time on you to figure out who you are interested in, why you're interested in them, and to physically go and talk to them.
Yeah, I'll just, from a Western standpoint, if I get an email from a student saying I'm interested in your research for the following reasons, I'll be like, aha, they took the time to read my website. Fabulous. And usually there's some keywords, and I can be like, if that's what you're interested in, here's some literature. And that's actually my screening process. Not to give away my game, but if they get some papers and they're like, ooh, I don't think so, then maybe we aren't going to have a conversation about my research. But even if someone comes in and says, I highlighted every word I didn't understand and the whole sheet is yellow, I'm like, hey, you took the time to notice what's going on, and we can sit down with the textbook and talk about it. So yeah, emailing people, and honestly, people are busy, so maybe emailing them twice is going to be necessary. I will point out that at the 400 level of our curriculum, we have research and independent study programs in basically all the fields. So if you're taking algae class, for example, you will by the end of that class do an independent project that may not be a full-fledged 10-week research project, but it's a research question that you've come up with and you're going to address. If you take Nick's 484 class or my 487 class, you're going to do 10 weeks of research in that class. It's as good as being in a summer research program as far as I'm concerned, right? You are doing research for 10 weeks. I've had students apply for grad school using just that one class as their research experience, and that's how I, for one, have set up that class, is so that students don't have to be, if you're working 30 hours a week and you're taking all your coursework, look for ways that your coursework can really help you out there so that you're not doubling up and doing so. The worst is that you join a lab, you don't have time to commit to it, and you can't get a good letter from that person, right? So if you're going to do the research process, do it in a way that really works for what you're doing right now as a college student.
I had one, but it's just another tidbit of information. So another great way to get research experience, especially in the cell and molecular field, and I think a number of us have done this, is that like University of Washington has a medical school, and every other big medical school in the country has hundreds of labs that are run by PIs or principal investigators, and they always hire research technicians who are full-time employees that come in and basically get to work for 40 hours a week doing research. And you get to help researchers and really get to see, and you're going to be working with graduate students and postdocs, and you're going to get to see what research looks like, at least in that field. And those jobs will often ask for a year or two of research experience. That can be a year of Lena's course, right? And you then have to sell it, like they said, the onus is on you to sell it, but 1 to 2 years of research experience, you can piece that together from a bunch of different experiences to meet that requirement. And then the onus is on you to really research, if you can figure out whose lab is putting out the job application. It usually doesn't say like, I'm Professor X, but usually if you go and look at the School of Medicine's webpage, you might be able to figure out who it is. And if you do that kind of investigative work, you can get one of these full-time research jobs, which gets you paid a reasonable salary, gets you a year or two of full-time research experience, and then you can make an informed decision about whether you should go to grad school. I don't know how those positions parallel things in ecology, but for cell and molecular, that's a really common approach.
I actually have, if anybody's interested, I worked as a field tech for ecology studies for about 5 years between undergrad and grad, and I have a list of websites that you can go to where they have exactly those sorts of postings, but just for ecology type stuff. If you're interested in a different field, I'd recommend talking to somebody in that field to see where those opportunities are. But as long as there's no other questions, I kind of want to loop back around to another question.
My question is about reference letters, and particularly how to ask for a reference letter that is applicable to where you're applying. And I have a bit of a tricky case because of my minor. I actually ended up in a physics lab, and so I'm trying to think of how to ask my PI to write a reference letter that might be applicable to a graduate program in biology.
So I actually got a bachelor's in physics and then spent 5 years doing work and then entered in this program biology. And my experience is that if it's a science and it's research experience, then the specific subject material is not super important. It can be, depending on what field it is and all that sort of stuff. But it's more about how do you approach science? How do you, what do you get out of it and what do you put into it? And that's sort of, at least my perspective.
I got all my reference letters for my professors. I think I had two biology and one chemistry, and my chemistry professor also acted as, he oversaw like one of the jobs I had as a mentor on campus. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think reference letters mostly it's less talking about the course material that you have and more talking about your work ethic and how you show that
worked hard and what things about your personality are good for grad school and less about the specific subject. So I think it shouldn't really matter if you get one from your physics professor as long as they can talk highly of you.
So, oh,
Oh.
So to address your question, in my experience, the hardest thing to find, to look in a grad student, well, the thing that makes grad students successful in my experience is intellectual curiosity, the motivation to keep going. Now that's very hard to see on paper, right? It's very hard to see on a GPA scores and all this rich stuff. So the letters of reference are good thing for that. They can tell you a little bit about the academic and skills and stuff, but what I want to see is this person motivated enough? Is this person going to get things through? Because guess what, and I'm going to use a scientific word for this, but shit happens, right? And then you have people who get things done, right, and done well. But you have the people who have many excuses for why things don't get done. And most of us, unfortunately or fortunately, want to work with people who get the things done. That's really hard to glean from paper or even talking to a person. So the letters of reference from people who know you, who can attest to what the panelists have mentioned, are going to help. So I wouldn't be concerned about being a letter from a physics person. Try to get letters from people who know you, who can talk about that work ethic and motivation.
And I'm like, you're going to ask me for a letter, I can just tell. But if somebody emails me and says, can you write me a letter? The first thing I do is shoot them back a document that has 6 questions on it, and I have whoever it is fill out those questions. What are you applying for, and why are you a good candidate for it? Why do you know me, and why are you asking me to write you a letter? What's your short-term goal? What's your long-term goal? Is there anything you really want me to talk about in this letter? Spoiler alert, you've just written your own letter for me, but the fact is that you've reminded me who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, but you've also told me some things that you think I might have forgotten, right? So I've had students from my 323 class, which is a big class, and they say, can you write me a letter? And I say, shoot, fill out these questions, and they write things back to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, they did that thing. I can write a whole paragraph about the thing that they did where they worked through their project with a group that was falling apart, and they brought their group back together, and it was amazing, right? That's awesome. So if anybody wants it, I will absolutely send you that document. I will not write you all letters because I don't know you all, but I will send you that document because if you came to somebody and said, I filled this out, and I would really like it if you could use this to help write a letter. That's really useful, and it gives the person writing at least a sense of why they should write you a letter. They may not take that advice, but at least they have a hint, and it makes it easier.
It's super quick. And what that also means is that ask for letters early. And in short, ask for letters early, and honestly, there's no harm if you're thinking about applying to graduate school, saying I need a letter because I am applying to graduate school. It's a distinction. But just get the letter, because if you ask for that letter and all that information the day before an application's due, you will not get a thoughtful letter, and it's not Lena's fault at all. So ask for the letter as soon as you're done taking that course and get it out of the way.
A couple of things. First, I wish I'd thought of that 20 years ago.
You can have it now,
I want your list of
You
questions.
know where I work.
And second, you want to get letters from people who know you as a researcher first, whether that's a physics researcher, biology, or whatever. Those are the most important letters. Second, you want to get people who know you as a biology student. And that's it. Those are where you get letters from. Not your soccer coach, not your sorority's faculty advisor that you were sorority president for 3 years. We don't care.
That would be super
Not
impressive.
your boss at the steakhouse where you've been working. That's great, you've been working right through school. We don't care what your boss thinks about your steak handling. So, not family friends. Those are the creepiest. Ever since she was a small girl, I've watched her. She's a blossom business.
Work experience, I'm going to push back on that. I
Okay.
think work experience is a fine one to get. I'm like looking at Nick, but I think that
Well-
if there's a reason that you're asking that boss for the recommendation, it's probably because you've been a good employee and you've done something really useful with your time.
Landscaping boss got me a job at UPenn. Talking.
couple more questions.
I'll go first. So a few of you talked about the process if you take a year off between undergraduate and graduate. Secret tips you might have.
Do it.
Do it.
Do it.
Yes, but so I am planning on doing it, but you mentioned how it might be different from going undergraduate to graduate.
I mean, just from the standpoint of letters, right? Like, if you've been gone from the program for 2 years and then you get in touch with me and ask for a letter, it's going to be harder for me to write it. So keeping up with the contacts that you need to support your application is just one example. That's a little bit easier if what you're doing in those intervening years is research, because now you're actually getting better letters. Because like, a letter from a research supervisor for 2 years is worth 10 of my letters from 323, right? So it all depends.
And you can ask your professors before you graduate, say, hey, in a couple years I might apply to grad school. Can you write me a letter now and just file it away somewhere?
I think it's a good idea. I had a letter writer pass away, and I was really glad I got my letter. I was really sad for his death. I was really sad for his death, but it was like one of those things that like, when I heard about it, I was like, holy cow. Well, and where I went, they also had a repository. I guess we don't have anything like that.
You can do that when you graduate.
Where you like get the letters and then you put it, because a lot of them need to be, well, some places need them to be like where you waived your right to see them, so they want them to be like not anonymous, but blinded, like so that you don't know what your letter says, and so there are repositories, and that's what I have done. You never know what's going to happen.
The registrar's office or career services or something has a space like that.
Was your question just about what to do with letters if you take time off, or was it more general?
Very general, any tips or?
Can I speak to that, or unless you have something?
I have a lot to say, but go ahead.
I guess I would just encourage you to try to get out of the student mindset as much as possible. So what I'm seeing here is a bunch of students asking, I'm going to go to grad school. What are the red flags that I need to get over? What's the red tape that I need to jump over? And I would suggest maybe flipping that and asking yourself, what are red flags that I need to look out for when I'm applying to grad school? What are things that I need that are important to me in an advisor? What are things that are important to me in a research setting, in my personal life, in my life-work balance? Is this position, this teaching assistantship, is this actually a livable wage? Because lots of universities will take off 15% of your assistantship in fees. They give you the assistantship and you have to give them back the fees. And Western does that. And so I would suggest if you do end up taking a year off to try to be as introspective as possible and try to learn as much about what's important to you as possible, because when you're in grad school, you won't have time to think about that. And it can be a very weird place to be. I'm sure some of the people in this room can attest to. But anyway, I just wanted to suggest flipping the perspective a little bit.
Saving money from having worked for a few years, for me, made a huge difference about what my lifestyle was like in grad school. At that point, I was able to afford a car, and I could live in a nicer apartment than the cheapest apartment I could find. And not all of the starting grad students could do that. Some of them came straight from undergrad and had no savings and had to really be hand to mouth for a while. So there's a lot of advantages in taking that time off to have a job.
Yeah, and I think the financial advantages are good. For me, I'd been in school for 12 years straight, or actually 16 years straight at that point. I needed to get some yayas out. And I was a ski bum for a year, and then I was going to go back into science, and then I heard about dog sledding and this other place, so I did that for a year. And I got actually another dog sledding job somewhere else, and that was great. And then when I started, like, okay, I want to get back into science now. I guess the second part goes back to figuring out, okay, what is it that I really want to do in grad school? Because several people said, well, if you go to grad school, make sure it is what you want to do. And so having that time to figure out what you want to do, and then following up on what Patrick is saying, having that time to figure out what's important to you, and what it is turning the interview process the other way around, so that it's not just that they're interviewing you, but you're finding out what the different programs have to offer you. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are the things that you feel like you need to fill in for your professional and future career development? Like for me, coming from chemistry, it's like, well, I'm good on the basic sciences, I got all that, but I've never taken an ecology field course. Oh, but I'm applying to this place that's totally playing down classes. At Stanford, they wanted you to come in and start doing your research right away. That was a perfect grad student. I was like, that's not me. I want to take classes. Oh, well, okay, well, if you want classes, you can take them over at Berkeley. And so by knowing what I wanted when I went to grad school, I could think carefully about what the different programs had to offer and figure out how I was going to get what I wanted from that program. And that helped me tremendously.
I would second a lot of what Cooper says and just say that, yeah, I took, I worked in the lab, I worked in industry, and then I went back to the lab. By the time I went to graduate school, I knew that that was what I wanted to do. And I had proven that to myself, and I feel like some of the same people in my cohort who had gone directly from undergraduate to graduate school had these like midlife crises, like partway through grad school, because it's hard, and it's hard, and they were like, is this actually what I want to do? I don't really know, because I've never tried anything else. And I think it was a lot easier for me to move through knowing that I'd already, struggled with those demons and was certain on what I wanted to do.
I went straight through to grad school from undergrad, and I turned out okay. But I wish I'd taken some time off.
I think it depends for different people.
Yeah,
There are some
that's
people
true, too.
coming out of undergrad, they know what they want, and they're ready. And if you're one of those people, ride that train.
I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't ready.
I would say Adrian mentioned that she had unsuccessful round of applications, and I did too. And if you do go through that, you can use that as kind of a litmus test. Not that like you're stupid, but you weren't ready. And so you'll get feedback on your application. And so if you do wind up in that situation, it can be a positive thing, because it can be that period of time that you need to become ready. Like he was saying, like you can be a 4.0 student that gets rejected from graduate school. That's clearly because you weren't ready, right? It's not because of anything else. So that time off can really be that chance.
That doesn't say anything bad about you for not being ready. It's just inappropriate timing, that's all.
Thicken your skin.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, Nina.
Just a quick question. So I remember in high school, people were applying to like 8, 10 colleges. I know it's really rigorous in that regard. Did you do that for graduate programs and schools?
Should we hold up the fingers for how many we applied to? So my experience, I actually applied to PhD programs right after this, and in the process of applying to them, I sent in the applications and realized I don't actually want to follow through with that. So after I sent the application, I shot the professor an email and said, actually, don't even consider me, because in the process of applying. And through that process, I realized there was really only one school, one professor that I was willing to actually commit to 5 to 6 years of PhD work with. And so it's fine if you're not 100% okay knowing what you want to apply to right now, but you might learn a lot.
I know for me, because I'm a more ecology-based person, I was looking around at different professors and emailing them first before I applied to any programs. And all of them said, I don't have money, or didn't get back to me, except for Western. So I had to get back to me here. So when it came time, Western was the only one that I applied to, because it was the only one that I was like, okay, I actually have people in labs that I can work in that I like. And that was part of it too, is finding the research that I want, because you might find a professor that you like and you're like, I want to do this research, and they don't have room or they don't have the money, and so sometimes you can't. And also, a lot of times applications cost money. So I recommend, personally, finding professors you want to work with. If they say yes, they want to work with you, then apply to those schools instead of just applying to a bunch of them like you would for your undergrad.
And depending on the kind of program you're applying to, there are sort of, at least for the molecular and cell folks, there are these umbrella programs that cover, like, you get into that program and like the world is your oyster, right? Like all of Seattle is available to you for joining labs. Those tend to be super selective programs, and they're also extremely overwhelming once you're in them, right? So if you show up and you can be in one of 800 labs, like that is a serious decision to make in your next year of life. But within a bigger university system, there are also smaller departments. So for example, I could have applied to the MCD program at UW, and instead I applied exclusively to biochemistry because it was a smaller choice of labs. It was much more personal, where I could email people and say, I am applying only to biochemistry. Do you have space? Could we be a match? So it felt more personal to me, and it cut down the number of places I had to apply to, right? Because I had decided more narrowly what I wanted to do.
So one question that hasn't come up that I think is important, because maybe not everyone's aware of this, but the vast majority of PhD programs, you get paid to go to school. You're not paying to go to school. And that's also, there are a lot of master's programs that that's also true for, but not most. But ours, that is true. You get paid to do a master's at our program. But anyway, just so you know, like, you've been paying, or somebody in your family, somebody's been paying for college, or the university has been paying for your tuition, but that is not true for a lot of programs.
That's true. Here at Western, if you receive an assistantship, you get paid. There are the vast majority of grad students across the campus here do not receive assistantships and do not get paid. So if you're lucky enough to get an assistantship, it can be
But in our program,
better than not.
we try and have assistantships for everyone.
For most PhD programs, like if you're going to a PhD program and they're saying that you've got to pay your tuition and stuff, then that's, you should not be. If you're doing a PhD program, then you should be getting your tuition paid and be getting a stipend.
And I would like to address something along these lines, and it seems to me that the underlying message, of course, is do your research about what you want to do, where you want to go. One aspect I want to stress also is you're going to be in the vast majority, in many cases, you're going to be working with someone, right, with an advisor in the lab. And just like they and the person, the advisor, are trying to figure out when they select applicants, can I work with this student? Is this good student going to be a good fit in my lab? Is this student going to be able to do so and so? You also want to be in the mindset of, why should I come here? Is this professor going to give me the time of day? If I come to PhD program, am I going to be talking to a professor, or am I going to be mentored by another student because the professor doesn't have the time to do? So any research lab, any professor who will apply, ought to give you the opportunity to talk to their lab members, the students, their emails, so you can say, hey, what is like working with Alejandro Acevedo? Is it a good fit? Can he talk to you? How is he like to work? So and I know it's hard, because I've been a grad student, we all have been a grad student, and I know I've been in the mindset that, oh, I want to get into a grad program. Anybody who says, yes, I'm there. I don't care. And we can save a lot of anguish sometimes if we do research and think more like, okay, also try to convince me why. So that's my suggestion.
There are predatory advisors out there who will take advantage of it. They're very few and far between, but I narrowly avoided one by talking to grad students in her lab before applying there. So that is maybe one of the most important things you can do, actually, is talk to other grad students in that lab. So thanks for bringing that up.
I completely agree and strongly recommend that. And both to find out what the lab is like and what the professor's like, but also the other thing you want to do, you're going to be learning a lot from your cohort, from the other grad students that you're going to be interacting with. And so you want to be talking to the grad students and finding out, okay, what do they like? Do they seem intellectually curious? Do they have a broad variety of skills? Are these people that I can relate to and that I'm going to be able to learn from? And for me, like when I was choosing among grad programs, like a few schools really stood out with, wow, okay, these are really interesting people to talk to. In other schools, you know, I was talking to people who felt kind of closed-minded and narrow-focused, and it's like, okay, you know, they're nice enough people, but I'm not going to get the breadth of intellectual stimulation I would like.
All right, well, it's the hour, so I'm going to thank everyone for coming. Please contact me if you feel like you want to get more out of your quest for graduate programs and you just have more questions. Just contact me, Dan Pollard at www.edu. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, folks.
Are you an AV person?
I wonder if we can find this video.
It will be emailed out. See if you can figure out how to turn it off.
That's a really great talk.
Cool. That was helpful? Okay, great.
No, you're good. And he's saying is that like there's more funding for it, so you can pay for it. If you don't finish it, you usually get like a master's degree given to you for life.